Hey everyone, it's me Ryan, but you knew that. I say it in every video. I'm feeling pretty good today. We got Mass Effect a few days away, then there's Biomutant a few weeks later. Of course, some of you have probably already been enjoying Resident Evil Village, and next month we have Ratchet & Clank. It's a lot of good stuff is coming our way, a lot of good stuff, and it's an exciting time to be playing games. At least in some cases. I don't know what games you play. So today I want to try talking about Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2. Final Fantasy VII Remake came and went last year for better or worse. I loved it, but I did understand why some fans may not have liked it. I just felt it did a great job of expanding the world and the characters of Final Fantasy VII, the ones we already know and love. We got to spend more time with some of the characters and parts of the story for better or worse, and I have a whole other video where I make a spirited defense of Final Fantasy VII Remake, so I'm not going to rehash it here, of course, though if you checked it out and then subscribe, that'd be pretty cool.
Let's all see what you've got.
So Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 is clearly in development, and likely, at least my belief here, is that it won't be nearly as long a wait as the first part because the gameplay systems are already there, and they're already in place, and the mechanics are already drawn out. It would just likely be a matter of creating new assets and features that they need to continue the story. It's not a lot of information we have to go on, so why talk about it? Good point. The video's over. We have not gotten much updates on Part 2, or really any to begin with, but we can take from some of what we may have heard and maybe just speculate a bit. We got word in March around the time of the announcement of Final Fantasy VII Remake coming to PS5 with a new DLC episode that Tetsuya Nomura was stepping down as the game director for Part 2. The following information came from Games Radar. Nomura, who was the main director of the first part, is handing over the mantle to Naoki Hamaguchi, who is his co-director for the first part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake project. Following the recent reveal of Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade for PS5 and a slew of new mobile games, Nomura shared the news with Famitsu that he would be stepping down as director of the project, but that he would still have role as a creative director of the series. Now, if your worry was having a consistent vision or direction for where the remake story is going to go, given that news, it's not going to be that big of a jump, and Nomura will still have creative say over the project. We will definitely know more after we get a chance to play the DLC episode for Final Fantasy VII Remake Intermission. Just last week, Square Enix revealed that the Yuffie episode is going to lead right into the start of Part 2. So I risk putting myself immediately out of date by recording this video since we'll know more once that is out and what to expect from Part 2, but hey, being out of date never stopped nobody, huh? As comicbook.com reports, as well as many other sites, but we're using comicbook.com here, during a presentation from Square Enix today that concluded with the reveal of a new trailer for Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, which is the upcoming DLC expansion releasing solely on PS5 next month, director Tetsuya Nomura also appeared to talk a bit about the future of the series. Specifically, Nomura talked about the events of the forthcoming sequel and where it will begin. According to Nomura, the next game in the series will immediately pick up where the forthcoming Intergrade expansion ends. While that doesn't shine a light on anything, we are just kind of shooting the shit here, so to speak, but it does let us know that we will have way more information soon on what this could be leading to when it comes to Part 2. By the end of this video, I'm going to sound like a broken record because that's all I'm going to say the whole time is like, we'll know more in a little bit, but hey. One of the things that I had a little bit of a nitpick with Part 1 is its linearity. I know the original game is linear in terms of its story and maybe even its content. It's not really a choice and consequence type of game, and it's obviously not non-linear storytelling. What I mean is you can kind of go where you wanted and travel freely on the open map for the most part, with exceptions, and obviously once you got the airship it was even more open, of course, but still. And look, I just played Final Fantasy X for the first time, or finished playing it for the first time, and I loved it, really. But that game was also fairly linear, so I don't mean that in a bad way, it's just the point I would make is that part of the charm of the original Final Fantasy VII was that kind of open feeling the continent had to it after leaving Midgar in the original Final Fantasy VII. I was forgiving of it in Part 1 because the first part of the original game is rather linear and fairly similar to it in that regard, where the next part is not. So I kind of hoped that and expected that it would follow a similar trend in the remake series. We did, in the same live stream from last week, get a small tiny little tease of what is coming for Part 2. Liana Rupert of Game Informer writes, "It was during the tail end of the live stream that Nomura mentioned wanting to announce something about the second part of the remake, but was advised to wait due to that not being approved by the other departments at the studio. But that doesn't mean we were left with nothing. Nomura did mention that development on the second part is going very well, and gave a small teaser that Cloud can be seen walking through a huge huge nature environment. He also added that Part 2 will have a very different atmosphere from what we saw in the remake's first half, giving fans a tiny glimmer of excitement to cling to before we learn more. So I don't think we should take that little tease to mean that the game is going to go the way I described that I wanted it to go, but it does make me speculate a bit as to if that does in fact confirm what I was suggesting. Though I am hesitant to give that little tease too much oxygen, only because it doesn't really mean anything of what we can expect from the game. It's just kind of like what it is, just a little tease. We are shooting the shit. It does seem that we will be getting an update sooner rather than later, that I would guess at least, on the direction Part 2 will be taking. It does seem to me that we will be getting an update sooner rather than later on the direction Part 2 will be taking. If I had to guess, it does seem that we will be getting an update sooner rather than later on the direction that Part 2 will be taking. What I am describing is not a strict open world, or at least not that's not what I want. It could go in that direction, but I will be fine if it was kind of either like a homage to the original of some kind, or at least something similar. I'm not one of those people that needs it to be a shot-for-shot remake with better graphics and gameplay in order to enjoy the remake or the game, but I do hope it does feel as linear. It doesn't feel as linear, and to the extent we can glean anything from Nomura's comments, Part 2 is going to feel different. That's definite. I mean, I don't know if it's going to be open world or be more open. Of course, it's not without precedent in the series. I have not played Final Fantasy XV, but to my knowledge, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's an open world game, and so it wouldn't be impossible to imagine Part 2 of Final Fantasy VII Remake could also be that way. The only other thing that we know is that according to what has been applied by Nomura and Hamaguchi, Yuffie is going to be playable in later entries and counter the group after they leave Midgar. The only other thing we know is that according to what has been implied by Nomura and Hamaguchi, Yuffie is going to be playable in later entries and encounter the group after they leave Midgar. Something most people know is that Yuffie herself in the original is actually optional to the party and doesn't need to be acquired to complete the game, but you still got her anyway because she was cool, and who doesn't want more party members? This little bit from Screen Rant explains just that. Final Fantasy VII Remake co-directors Naoki Hamaguchi and Motomu Toriyama were recently interviewed for the official Square Enix website. Not only did they confirm that Yuffie will encounter the Cloud's party in Intermission, but she is being prepared for a later meeting with the group. According to Hamaguchi, the goal of Intermission, which is the DLC episode's name officially, is to introduce Yuffie's story now so that it will act as a lead into her future meeting with the party. This confirms that Yuffie will be appearing in future Final Fantasy VII Remake games, as we assumed, and she is likely to remain a playable character. Obviously, that doesn't tell us much about Part 2, except to say that we will likely, again, as I have said a few times already, know much more of the direction or get an idea, very least once Intermission comes, of where we're going. An article from VG 24/7 back in January gives us some insight into what the devs are thinking when it comes to the sequel to Final Fantasy VII Remake. They reference an interview that was done with director Naoki Hamaguchi and Yoshinori Kitse, who is the producer. By the way, if I pronounce these names wrong, I'm sorry, I'm trying. The article references this interview, and it does give us some more insight, as I said, into their process for creating Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2. It says, in terms of carrying the story on into another installment, Kitse comments how the development team is aiming to continue supplying the same level of detail that we saw in Midgar to the rest of Final Fantasy VII world, to a degree that would not only surprise players, but also go beyond players' expectations. Additionally, they say the team is working on making the battle system even deeper by adding new mechanics and elements. When discussing new staff coming to work on the sequel, Hamaguchi said, "A word that pops into mind is action battle. They experienced a new type of action battle system, and they want to contribute to the system too. They definitely contribute different ideas that will hopefully allow us to create new surprises to the battle system as well." Now, obviously, with all that in mind, we don't have much to go on with Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2, but to summarize what we can get from some of this information, it's fairly simple. The combat is going to keep evolving, and so is the story. That's pretty much a guarantee. Whether that means an open world type of game is an entirely different question, and I think the best thing we can really do is just wait and experience the Yuffie episode when it arrives, and see if it answers any of these questions that we may have about what we can expect about Part 2, which kind of makes this video fruitless in a way, but hey, that's what we're here for. We're here to talk. That's not a lot here, obviously. Again, like I said, it's not a lot, but I wanted to make this video as a way of opening the conversation about Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2, given that it's a little less than a month away till Intermission and what we can expect. So I'm curious to see what you think. Are you at all interested in the remake series? Do you have any ideas based on what we discussed how Part 2 is going to shake out? Let me know in the comments. Also, I am aware that some of you may not be able to play the Yuffie episode when it launches, since it's exclusive to PS5 for now, and the consoles are limited in supply. I think it's fairly silly to not allow PS4 players to get that extra content, and I have always said that, or at least not here, but I've said it in my head. Either way, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If not, a thumbs down. Subscribe if you want to see more. Most of all, thank you for watching. I love you all. Maybe.
you.